Phase 4 sucked, and I've not been subtle or kind to the MCU as of late, and I pretty much explained everything in my last video. But if you skipped that video, I'm reviewing all Multiverse Saga films in release order. I just released my Phase 4 video a few days ago, so if you're here and you're still sticking around, these are all my thoughts, reviews, and scores for each movie of Marvel's Phase 5 lineup. Please enjoy, cause I gotta tell you, I didn't enjoy myself watching these movies. So let's start with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Ant-Man 3 is probably the most meh phase opener to date, cause even WandaVision was a better opener for Phase 4. It's not a terrible film, but it hasn't hit the quality of anything from Phase 1 through 3, except maybe Thor the Dark World or Incredible Hulk, which is a good start for Marvel to get back on track, but it's not exactly capturing the magic of the Infinity Saga either. The problem with a film like this is that Ant-Man films have never been a big stakes outing. The first film was a low stakes film that was a refreshing palate cleanser to contrast the high stakes craziness of the Infinity Saga. And Ant-Man and the Wasp, though not as great as the first Ant-Man film, and dare I say not even close, but it wasn't terrible and served as a palate cleanser after the devastating end of Infinity War, and added a reason for Scott to be in the quantum realm for a few years for him to return in Endgame. These films were meant to be goofy, ground-level films, but in this film they ramped up the intensity and tried to make Ant-Man the savior of the MCU for Phase 5. The reason that this is a problem is that Ant-Man is a C-list hero. He's not Captain America or Spider-Man or Iron Man or Thor. He's better utilized in low-stakes outings, and when in bigger ensemble films like Civil War or Avengers, he's always been better used in supporting roles. This is no better shown than in this film, when you're supposed to be introducing your supposed big bad of the franchise, that being Kang, at least at the time, but he's defeated by a C-list hero, which is not a good sign for this character. I'm sure he could have gotten stronger, and Jonathan Majors had not been booted from the franchise yet, but still is not a good sign when trying to establish a power level for this character. But I guess it worked out, since now that he's been beaten, you don't have to explain why he doesn't return after this movie. The saddest part about that is, Kang was about the only good character in this film aside from Ant-Man, which is unfortunate. Now, Scott has always been a great character, and it's no different here, but everyone else frustrated the hell out of me. Hank Pym as a character is barely utilized. Hope is hardly in this film despite being the second half of the film's damn title, and Janet frustrated the hell out of me to no end, because she kept information from us the audience and the characters so that the plot could move forward. But by far the worst character is Cassie. She is not a likable character in this film. They tried to make her relatable to her dad, but instead turned her into an activist and is somehow a super genius just to push the plot forward. Then there's the CGI. My God, I've never seen a movie in the MCU that's been so heavily reliant on post-production. The amount of visual noise is just asinine. Worst of all is the CGI effects for MODOK. He looks like he was made in Shark Boy and Lava Girl. We all know the meme. Hell, there was a guy I saw who did a better version of this with Blender. I'll put it on screen here with the channel name if you want to check it out, and I'll link the video in the description if you want to know more of how he did it. But if some Joe Schmo on the internet can do a better job with a free app, you know there's a problem. Also, he had the weakest childish redemption arc I've ever seen. Oh, also they redeemed MODOK. Like, come on, he could have been such a great returning villain. Either way, this film wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great. It needed more, and not rely so heavily on its villain. The characters, motives, and overall story just didn't work for me. 6 out of 10. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 had always felt weird to me as a film, both for good and bad reasons. For one, it felt like the movie was meant to take place before Infinity War, as Adam Warlock had appeared in this film, and it was teased at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2. However, the reason he feels weird in this movie is that he should have appeared in the Infinity Saga, simply because in the comics he is the original defender of the Soul Stone. But the second reason is he's barely in the film, and even James Gunn admitted he felt pressure to include him just so the tease at the end of 2 wasn't unresolved. On top of this, I feel like he's sort of wasted in this film, and they used him too much as a joke rather than a serious threat, which I think is what Adam Warlock is supposed to be, which is no more showcased than by casting Will Poulter as Adam. Listen, Poulter can do serious roles, but all I see is the boy who got his nutsack bitten by a spider in We're the Millers. So in my opinion, it would have served better if you had casted someone like Keanu Reeves as Adam Warlock. And like I said, he feels criminally underutilized. So here's hoping he's better used later, but I have zero faith in that at the moment. Beyond that though, the movie is really good. Only other thing I can complain about, which is scraping the bottom of the barrel, is the small lazy writing here and there. Some small plot conveniences to get the plot moving forward. But where the movie succeeds is the Guardians themselves. Peter Quill has always been a great character, and the way that they explore his grief over the loss of Gamora is handled really well here. and the fact that they didn't just hit the reset button on Gamora is something I can say is done better here than how they handled Loki in the first season of his show. It felt like Endgame gave James Gunn a layup here to reset Gamora, but James said, no, I'm not going to be lazy here. But every character in this film have their moments, which I guess makes sense since after this the team splits up and everyone goes their separate ways. Though I don't like that they did this, it makes sense because James Gunn fucked off to work for the competition. I am holding out hope that we will still see the characters return later, but then again, I may not continue to Doomsday if the movies keep going the way the rest of the MCU's Phase 4 and 5 have been going. But if the MCU had more of this type of film, they wouldn't be in such a dire position right now. I'll get to more of that later at the end of the video, but I like the storytelling in this movie. I'm surprised no one dies in this film either, especially Rocket, since that seems to be what they were trying to set up, but I'm glad they all survived to face off against the High Evolutionary, the big bad of the movie. Oh right, speaking of, this villain is fucking awesome. He's threatening and delivered a villain that I don't think we've ever seen, or if we have seen it, it's been a while, and that's a villain that is just pure evil. He doesn't have any ulterior motives that we can sympathize with. If we do have a villain like this, let me know, but he's very well written as a villain. Even if he has a really weird god complex that thinks he's doing the universe a favor, but that's beside the point. Then of course, as I said earlier, the team does split up by the end of the film, which was emotional. Some people liked it, some people hated it. I'm kind of in the middle. On one hand, I like how they did it and it was very well done, but on the other hand, this team is one of the only good things left of the older MCU, and I'm sad to see them go. But maybe we'll get them back in a later film whenever the MCU gets back on track. Overall, I'll give this film an 8 out of 10. It's not perfect, it's certainly not as good as 1 or 2, but it's still a great film with good writing and good emotional payoff. Oh boy, Secret Invasion. What a fucking disaster. I can't express just how disappointing this show was. The trailers looked badass, but the actual product wasn't even remotely close to what those trailers promised. Now, should this show have been a movie? Yes, 100%. But even as a show, it could have worked. The MCU proved that with Winter Soldier, they can handle espionage thrillers, and a weekly format could have added tension, giving fans something to theorize about even after each episode. Unfortunately, Marvel didn't bring back any major characters beyond Rhodey, which made it painfully obvious that he'd end up being a Skrull. If there's one positive, everyone collectively agrees that this show was trash. Rarely does a Marvel project get universally dunked on like this, and rightfully so. For those who don't know, Secret Invasion is based off of the comic arc of the same name, where Skrulls infiltrate Earth by impersonating heroes. The MCU introduced Skrulls in Captain Marvel, but instead of being villains, they were painted as misunderstood refugees. Now, in this show, they're suddenly upset at Nick Fury for not finding them a home, leading Gravik, a rogue Skrull, to decide, screw it, we're just gonna rule over Earth. A solid premise on paper, but ruined by poor execution. This show thinks it's a spy thriller. It isn't. Instead of building upon paranoia and suspense, where characters and audiences don't know who to trust, they just tell us everything outright. There's no mystery, there's no tension. Rhodey's reveal as a Skrull is done through a lazy mirror shot, robbing that twist of real impact. Compare that to Winter Soldier, where the Hydra infiltration was built up carefully, leading to genuinely tense action sequences. Then there's the plan itself. Gravik wants to trigger World War III, wait for humans to wipe each other out, and then take over the planet. But why? The Earth would be destroyed by nuclear fallout. There's also an uninhabited, non-toxic planet just sitting around, the one where Thanos retired on in Endgame. Why not just settle there? The characters? Wasted. Talos and Maria Hill are killed off for cheap shock value. Rhodey's been a Skrull possibly since Civil War, which breaks everything. Are we supposed to believe a Skrull attended Tony Stark's funeral? That retroactively ruins Rhodey's arc post-Civil War, something no fan wants to accept. But worst of all is Nick Fury. This show completely assassinated his character. Marvel once again falls into the Hollywood trend of turning legacy male characters into washed-up failures so a newer female character can swoop in and fix them. And no, that is not me criticizing female characters, that's me criticizing lazy writing. Just make a good female character without gutting fan-favorite characters in the process. And somehow, this show ends by introducing the most overpowered character we've ever seen, and she's not even interesting. In the end, Secret Invasion isn't just a failure, it's an embarrassment. A show that stands as proof that Marvel is more focused on pumping out content than making quality stories. This show tarnishes the MCU's brand further. It's a 0 out of 10. Nothing else to say. Loki Season 2 is the first MCU Disney Plus show that didn't feel like a waste of time to watch. For as much praise as I give some of the older shows, many of them are skippable, and the ones that don't are still just decent shows that still have really bad pacing issues. This season I feel was structured far better than Season 1, and the TVA in this season doesn't piss me off like they did in Season 1. In the first season, they pruned other timelines, and if you remember during that segment, I said how they handled it here and in Deadpool 3, which I'll get into later, was far better utilized, as it made the TVA deal with the other universes instead of just having a sacred timeline, which is one of the worst decisions in the MCU. And it's a shame it took Season 2 to do this. This is by far the best MCU show so far. Yes, even better than Daredevil Born Again, but I'll get into why that is when I discuss that show. This is far above anything so far, which is kind of scary to say because it sticks out like a sore thumb on Disney+. And many have described it as the Andor of Marvel TV shows, which is exactly right. This show stands far and above previous shows that it reminds me of how Marvel originally would outsource their shows to Netflix, because it almost feels like another studio made this. The style was awesome, the narrative was complex but focused, and it had a purpose. The characters were fun to watch, and it didn't undermine what came before it, like they did with Season 1. And this season had a better redemption arc for Loki than in Season 1. And had a full circle moment of Loki where he wanted a throne, and he got it, but at a great personal cost to himself in order to save trillions across the multiverse. In great contrast to how he was willing to kill billions in Avengers for a throne. This is sadder when you find out that Loki's biggest fear is loneliness, and that's exactly the cost of him taking this throne. He saved trillions and got his throne, but he's forever alone. Now, we are going to see him in Doomsday, which makes me wonder how he'll factor into the story, but we'll get there whenever Doomsday comes out. What's even crazier for me is having liked this season as much as I did, is I only just watched it recently when deciding to make this video. I skipped this season despite everyone saying it was good, but I was just so tired of what the MCU had become that I wasn't willing to give anything a chance. Now, that's not my fault, as Marvel has earned and deserved this kind of ire, and does not deserve the benefit of the doubt moving forward, but I'll get into that at the end of the video. Now, having said this show isn't perfect. I'm kind of tired of shows being 6 episodes by this point. Now, that's not to say that we need to adopt the CW formula of making 24 30-minute episodes, but that doesn't mean that the pendulum needs to be swung in the opposite direction either. I think anywhere from 9 to 12 episodes is the perfect middle ground for shows, if you want to explore character depth and perfectly flowed pacing. Every show prior has suffered from this 6-episode formula, as they just feel like extended movies. The pacing is either just too fast or too slow for most of these shows because of this, and this show is no exception. The show has a perfect flow through most of its episodes until the end where things kind of feel rushed, and I think another 3 episodes or so could have paced this better, so that way some emotional moments could breathe a little better. And it felt like a lot to juggle for the amount of time the show had left. Season 2 also suffers from some of the same issues of convoluted storytelling that Season 1 had, and I'm still not a big fan of Sylvie in this show, but luckily this season seemed to have focused more on Loki this time around, as I feel like she took up too much screen time for Season 1 for my liking. Sylvie often felt like a narrative device more than a fully realized character, especially when she hogged up so much of Loki's screen time in Season 1, and she still didn't even evolve much in Season 2. But on the opposite hand, Mobius was still a very likable character, and many of the other supporting cast is too, which is a nice breath of fresh air for how every other show has supporting characters that I could care less about, including, weirdly enough, Daredevil Born Again, a show I liked. It's just nice to see that someone had good storytelling, as he saved the show in being an easy 9 out of 10 show. The Marvels is easily the worst MCU film ever made. I've never watched a film so boring and pointless. Halfway through, I genuinely believed that taking a shotgun blast to the face would have been more enjoyable. And while I could sit here making jokes about what I'd rather do than watch this again, let's actually break down why this movie is such a pile of hot garbage. The red flags showed up long before this movie even dropped. From Brie Larson's passive-aggressive "does anyone even want me back" comments, to the review embargo lifting the day before release, to the name being changed from Captain Marvel 2, it was clear even Marvel had no faith in this film. The marketing was abysmal. The first movie only really succeeded because it was tied to Endgame. That safety net is gone now, and what we're left with is nothing. Let's get the worst offender out of the way, Dar-Ben. This villain is so worthless, I had to Google her name for this script. People usually point to Ronan or Malekith as the worst MCU villains, but Dar-Ben gives them a serious run for their money. She's not threatening, her actress has 0 screen presence, and while her powers are cool, the movie does nothing with them. To make matters worse, they had to nerf Captain Marvel just to make the final battle last more than 5 minutes. And even then, Dar-Ben never feels like a legitimate threat. To compensate for this, they threw in the gimmick where the 3 protagonists would switch places whenever they would use their powers at the same time. Does this make the villain better? No, not really. Does it make the movie more interesting? Absolutely not. The comedy of this movie is non-existent. This film isn't funny or entertaining in the slightest. The moment that broke me in this movie was the musical planet scene, where the characters can only speak through song. I sat through a 10-minute musical number that made me wish I didn't have ears. It's played as a joke, but I wasn't laughing. I fell asleep 3 separate times while watching this film. It was that boring. Now, plenty of people have pointed this out, but I'll say it too. This movie feels like it was written by AI. It is soulless in every way. There's no suspense, no emotional weight, no coherent narrative at all. Things just happen because they have to. It's and then storytelling at its worst. Then there's the cast. No one looks like they even want to be in this movie, except for Iman Vellani as Kamala Khan, who's the only bright spot in this movie, by the way. I gave her show a lot of crap, but credit where credit is due, she's likable and fun to watch. Even if her character's motivation is still just, I want to be a superhero because I want to be a superhero. Beyond her, there's nothing. Brie Larson is just as boring and wooden as she was in her debut film. Whether it's bad acting or bad direction, she's simply uninteresting. Monica Rambeau, even worse. She had no character development in WandaVision, and she doesn't get any here either. But the biggest insult is what they did to Nick Fury. If you had watched Secret Invasion before this, it is baffling. He is completely unrecognizable, reduced to comic relief without any explanation. In one project, he's serious, and in this project, he's a joke. It's emblematic of the larger problem, a total lack of cohesion across the MCU. Disney has lost money, subscribers, and credibility with films like this. The Marvel is just another reminder of how Marvel has fallen from grace. Aside from Miss Marvel herself, there is nothing redeemable in this movie. Even she couldn't save this dumpster fire. 1 out of 10 film. Season 2 of What If looked promising at first. The first few episodes actually felt like they understood the one change premise better than Season 1 did. But right around the halfway mark, the wheels fell off, and they fell off hard. I'll keep this one more brief than I did with Season 1, as this video is going to be long enough already, and I still have Season 3 to do. Here's a quick rundown of each episode. Episode 1 is What If Nebula Joined the Nova Corps? It's a solid opener. Basically, it's Nova switching sides from Thanos and becomes a Nova Corps member. It finally feels like that they remembered their rule of one small change causes big outcomes. Characterizations are consistent, and the noir style fits Nebula well, even if the premise itself wasn't that intriguing. But I still enjoyed myself, so I'll say a 7 out of 10 episode. A solid start. Episode 2 is What If Peter Quill Attacked Earth's Mightiest Heroes? This one surprised me. In this episode, Yondu never reforms early and turns Peter into Ego, so Ego ends up raising Peter, leading him to attacking Earth as Ego's pawn. Earth ends up forming an early Avengers lineup, since this was in Peter's early childhood years, consisting of Hank Pym, King T'Chaka, Nova Prime, Goliath, a still Soviet-controlled Winter Soldier, and a weaker pre-movie Thor. Surprisingly emotional, great characterization, especially between young Hope and Peter. Fights were also very fun. Easily one of my favorite episodes, earning an 8 out of 10 episode, which is surprising because I had originally thought that this was going to be a continuation of the T'Challa Star-Lord story, but when I saw Child Peter I realized it was different. But still a very good episode overall. Episode 3 is What If Happy Hogan Saved Christmas? It's exactly as it sounds. So Justin Hammer pulls a Die Hard at Avengers Tower, and Happy has to try and stop him, while turning into a Hulk. It's silly, but a fun, low-stakes Christmas special. But I just wish it had more going for it, but given most of the other episodes, a 7 out of 10 still isn't bad. Episode 4 is What If Iron Man Crashed into the Grandmaster? This is the long-lost cut episode from Season 1. Tony Stark ends up in Sakaar after Avengers 1, due to not making it back through the portal after the Battle of New York. It's a fun episode with consistent character writing. My only gripe is that Iron Man is clearly meant to be the main character here, but Gamora is the one who ends up to be chosen by the Guardians of the Multiverse in Season 1, which still makes no sense. But as a standalone, I liked it and wish we had more episodes like this, so easily an 8 out of 10 episode for me. Episode 5 is What If Captain Carter Fought the Hydra Stomper? Here's where the decline starts. I don't mind them revisiting past stories like Marvel Zombies or T'Challa Star-Lord if they had something to tell. In this case, it's a continuation of Captain Carter's story, which is fine. I'd rather something else, but it's still not a bad idea. Steve becomes Carter's version of the Winter Soldier, which is interesting, but the ending ruins it. Instead of wrapping up her story, Carter gets whisked away for yet another multiversal crisis. This show refuses to end stories, and is obsessed with building towards a crossover event that nobody asked for. What could have been a solid 7 out of 10 episode drops to a 5 out of 10 purely because of that ending. Episode 6, What If Kahori Reshaped the World, is frustrating. On one hand, it uses the what if concept very well, The Tesseract crash lands in North America after Odin fails to stop Ragnarok, now empowering a Native American tribe. A new character named Kahori gets her powers by falling into the river where the Tesseract resides, and leads a fight against the Spanish Inquisition. It's a cool fusion of native history and the cosmic powers of the MCU. But Kahori herself is bland, overpowered without proper build-up, and again, the ending ruins everything. Strange Supreme of all people shows up to recruit her for yet another crossover, instead of just ending the story here. Another promising episode sabotaged by its own finale, making this a 5 out of 10 episode for me. Episode 7 is What If Hela Found the 10 Rings? Here, Odin banishes Hela to Earth instead of Hell, where she teams up with the Mandarin. In this episode, they both get redemption arcs, which sounds cool until Odin acts completely out of character for no reason. He then proceeds to give Hela Asgard, and then he praises her growth in a way that doesn't align with his established personality and how he's handled in Thor. Despite decent writing, the character assassination of Odin drops this episode to a 5 out of 10 rating. Episode 8 is What If the Avengers Assembled in 1602? This could have been a great episode, but of course this season decides to make the same mistake moving forward. Basically, it's a 1602 era world stuck in time due to a multiversal fracture caused by Steve Rogers striking the Time Stone during Infinity War. But who's brought in to solve it? Captain Marvel. She's again dragged into a story that she has no business being in. The aesthetic is great, Elizabethan costumes, magic storms, multiversal anomalies, but it's wasted. Wanda can somehow now summon Carter across the multiverse, which makes no sense given the events of Multiverse of Madness, and we eventually find out Steve was the cause of the problem. They fix it, and then Strange Supreme recruits Captain Carter. Again. This episode is the biggest wasted potential I've ever seen. This episode could have been a solid 7 out of 10 if they had stayed focused, but Carter's constant involvement tanks it. 3 out of 10 episode. Episode 9 is What If Strange Supreme Intervened? And here's where it all falls apart. Not only does this episode waste 5 minutes recapping Carter and Strange, but it commits character assassination on Strange Supreme. He was the most interesting character the show has ever created, and now he's reduced to a generic villain. He's inexplicably free from his universe and capturing heroes and villains for a ritual to save his world by sacrificing them. This completely undoes his arc from Season 1. Why is Captain Carter leading the fight against Strange? Why is she constantly being shoved into battles she shouldn't be able to survive? She's fighting zombified Wanda, Infinity Gauntlet Thanos, and King Killmonger with all 6 Infinity Stones. Why? And somehow Captain Carter doesn't die using the Infinity Stones herself. Remember when Tony Stark died from using them? You remember when Hulk pretty much cripples himself for years? Yeah, me neither. This is the worst type of smash the toys together storytelling I've ever seen. A chaotic, bloated mess of fan service without any respect to its own characters or logic. Strange ends up sacrificing himself, reviving his universe. Carter then asks Uatu to see the multiverse, and then we're left with the only thing in the show that I ended up liking. The reference to Loki keeping the multiverse intact via the World Tree. But that's not enough to save this train wreck of a 0 out of 10 season finale. Overall, this season started strong, but fell apart fast. Good episodes up front, but its obsession with crossovers and Captain Carter, Strange Supreme's regression ruining his character, and Kahori still being bland even in the finale, destroyed this season. Also, I'm sick of Captain Carter being everywhere, and sadly, this isn't the last time we'll see of her. Final score for this season is a 5.3 out of 10. Echo is a show that doesn't even justify its own existence, and even Marvel knew it when they decided to just dump the entire show on Disney Plus just to get it out of the way. I was baffled the show even got announced, let alone greenlit, and she was by far the least interesting character to come out of the Hawkeye show. And it shows with just how boring it is, and how she hasn't even been featured in anything since, and only had a passing reference in Daredevil Born Again. Now, I actually tried to keep an open mind here, mostly due to a personal bias, as I know she has a connection to Daredevil in some of the most recent comics that aren't actually half bad. And Daredevil is my favorite Marvel hero, so I was hoping to see a great origin tale for this character. Cause sometimes Marvel is able to take a character that many people consider B or C list characters and make them good. But what we got instead was more Marvel slop. Echo follows Maya Lopez, who, for those who may not know, is a deaf amputee, and in Hawkeye was the leader of the Tracksuit Mafia, who were led by Wilson Fisk's Kingpin. However, in this show, she went back to her hometown in Oklahoma to reconnect with her family, but her past keeps coming back to haunt her. Now, I'm not going to say this show is worse than She-Hulk or God forbid Secret Invasion, but it also doesn't even crack my top 5 favorite shows of either phase. But the first red flag for me was this show needing to give us almost an entire episode dedicated to recapping her past and the events of Hawkeye. Because if your fans can't remember, that's never a good sign. What's even worse is, this show's highlight was the fight between her and Daredevil and the scenes with her and Kingpin. Like, I wanted to come in and like this character, but she can't even carry her own show, which is another big red flag for this show. If there's one thing I can praise about this show, it's the setting where it helps sell the concept of Maya's culture. But that isn't enough for me if your character is bland and the actress who portrays the character is the same boring-ass, stoic personality that many other MCU females now seem to have, like Captain Marvel. The flashback cutscenes were used for too long with little explanation as to why they were even being shown. The writing and pacing was all over the place, and things seemed to happen just because. Some things that happen don't make sense, and make some of the characters look like idiots. For example, at one point, Maya is taken hostage, but instead of keeping her prosthetic leg like a smart villain, they decide to leave it in the room with her, within reaching distance, which she then uses to escape, and now she has her leg to fight. She also doesn't seem to have the same power she did in the comics, which makes me wonder how she's able to do any of this stuff when she can't hear people coming. Daredevil at least makes sense, because we are shown that he has powers that allows a blind man to even fight. But without her comic powers, I'm at a loss as to how she does anything she does. And probably one of the most disappointing aspects of this show is its promise to be more mature and bloody, like Daredevil Born Again. Which is exciting, because that meant Marvel was willing to go more mature with their projects depending on what the show was. Worst of all, they made Kingpin look like a complete fool here, and that's to the show's detriment. Luckily, you can completely skip this show, and you will lose nothing going from this show to Daredevil Born Again, because Kingpin from Echo acts nothing like Kingpin from Daredevil Born Again. And what truly broke this show for me is that stuff just happens because they happen. There is no reason to watch this show. The story doesn't push the narrative forward at all, and it's not even a good self-contained story, because nothing there mattered either. So for that, I have to give this show a 1 out of 10. Deadpool and Wolverine, or Deadpool 3, is one of the few bright spots in Phase 5. And honestly, that's thanks entirely to Ryan Reynolds, and how he presented this movie. It's not perfect. Like Spider-Man No Way Home, it's another nostalgia-driven multiverse movie with some glaring flaws, but both of these films succeeded in spite of their issues. I had high hopes for this movie, and for good reason. Even as the MCU collapses under its own weight, the Deadpool movies have consistently delivered. They're about entertaining the audience, not shoving political messages down your throat, or trying to force characters no one cares about. This movie accomplished that. Sure, it leans heavily into nostalgia like No Way Home did, but where the other movies feel desperate, this one uses it in a meta-commentary way on modern Hollywood itself. For example, the concept of an anchor being makes no sense if you take it literally. Why would one random person from a random universe cause that universe to die off when they die? But from a meta perspective, it's clever. An anchor being is essentially the character keeping the franchise alive. Once they're gone, people stop caring. In the Fox X-Men universe, Logan makes sense as that anchor. After Logan died, interest for the X-Men died. Maybe Ryan Reynolds is hinting that Tony Stark is the MCU's anchor being due to the franchise dying, or maybe even Spider-Man since they're among the last characters people still care about, and keeping it barely functioning. Outside of the deeper commentary, the movie is just shamelessly fun. Like the previous Deadpool movies, it mixes comedy, action, and surprisingly heartfelt moments, making you care about the characters amidst all the chaos. Something Thor: Love and Thunder completely forgot to do. You can tell both Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds are having a blast with this film. And finally seeing Wolverine in his classic yellow suit is just pure satisfaction. Logan's universe is dying after his death, so Deadpool gets scooped up by the TVA. Why? Don't overthink it. It works well enough, and honestly, this is probably the best use of the TVA in the MCU so far. They offer Wade a chance to join the MCU and become an Avenger, which he jumps at the opportunity to, until he learns none of his friends can come with him due to the universe dying because of Logan being dead. So he bails, hunts down a Wolverine to replace his own, and tries to save his universe. The multiverse hopping gives way to a revolving door of cameos. Elektra, Blade, Chris Evans' Human Torch, Sabretooth, X-23, and Channing Tatum's Gambit make appearances. Unlike most Marvel movies that use cameos as a sort of desperate crutch, Deadpool and Wolverine uses them as a seasoning. This film isn't carried by these cameos, it's carried by a solid script, likable characters, and its self-awareness. The cameos are the cherry on top, not the condiment on a burnt steak. This is exactly how you do nostalgia right, much like No Way Home did with Tobey and Andrew. That said, the movie isn't flawless. If you don't pick up on the meta angle, the plot can feel confusing and contrived. The anchor being concept, in particular, feels odd if you take it at face value. There are also a lot of convenient moments where things just happen because the plot needs them to. The third act also drags a little bit, and Deadpool himself even lampshades this. Another issue is consistency. The first two films felt grounded and centered around Wade's personal story. This movie feels more like a commentary on Marvel and the Fox universe as a whole. However, this does work for Deadpool as a character, but it's still a shift that some people may have an issue with. Personally, I didn't mind it, but I can understand why some people do. In fact, despite loving this movie, I still prefer Deadpool 2 overall, and I think this movie is either on par with the first film or slightly below it. Not a bad place to be, considering how good those films are. Lastly, Cassandra Nova, the villain, started strong, but devolves into a generic destroy-everything antagonist by the third act. Deadpool and Wolverine is a solid 8 out of 10 movie. It still holds up alongside the first two movies, even if it's just a little messier. Deadpool is still my favorite at a 9 out of 10, with the first and third film both sitting comfortably at around an 8 out of 10. Agatha All Along is a show that seems to be the most polarizing show I've seen so far. Also, it's really weird. This show started off being called Agatha House of Harkness, then Agatha Coven of Darkness, then Agatha Darkhold Diaries, before settling on Agatha All Along, which, I gotta be honest, was the worst one of the bunch, but I digress. Other YouTubers who I watch and people whose reviews I typically trust have varying degrees of whether they liked or disliked this show. Now, me and pretty much everybody else went into this thinking, who the hell asked for this? And why is this character getting her own show? The same questions we had for Echo, and admittedly, I entirely skipped the show because of that. But I had to watch it in order to give this review. Now, going into the show, I had expected the same old 6-episode format, where they took a movie idea and stretched it into a 1-season format, but was pleasantly surprised that this was not the case. If I remember correctly, this was the first live-action Disney Plus show that went beyond the 6-episode format, and that's my first praise of this show, is it actually is trying to be a TV show, and not a long movie. Sure, X-Men 97 and What If made longer seasons, but these were because they were built with the TV show format in mind. The people making the show also decided to rely less on CGI and more on practical effects, which I can give my proper respects to for those decisions. However, just because I praise it for actually feeling like a TV show, doesn't mean it accomplishes being a good TV show, at least at first. So, based on what happened to Agatha at the end of WandaVision, we knew going into this show that this was going to start with her stuck in her Agnes persona. So the sense of mystery they're trying to portray here doesn't work. So the first 2 episodes are working overtime to try and draw me in, but it is failing to do it, being heavily bogged down by its reliance on trying to recap WandaVision and explain why she's breaking free from the hex put on her after the death of Wanda in Multiverse of Madness. Now, what I can praise about the show is the latter half of the show, as there was a clear mystery around Agatha, and it weirdly hooked me for some reason. And I appreciated the mystery around the kid, even if I knew almost immediately that this was supposed to be Wiccan, Wanda's son. But that just gave me more questions like, how is he here, and where is his brother's Speed? But unfortunately, the show takes too long to come to any conclusions. Some questions are left unanswered, and most of the supporting cast I found to be mostly uninteresting. But in a breath of fresh air, they don't try and paint Agatha as a hero or a misunderstood villain. She is just straight up a bad person, and they play into that, which is great. But frustratingly, I found much of the show boring still, despite what things they got right. And that's because it fell into the same problem of not really going anywhere, not a lot of likable characters, and a clashing tone. That's another thing, this show is trying to go darker with its imagery, but will suddenly crack a joke randomly about something that is completely unrelated. So overall, I appreciate it trying to be different, but it certainly wasn't interesting enough to keep me engaged, even with some of the cool characters they finally introduced us to, like Death. But it felt superficial, and like things were happening just to happen. This show is a 5 out of 10 for me. Oh boy, back with this train wreck of a show. And somehow, Season 3 manages to be the worst one yet. This season had the chance to finally get back on track, deliver proper what-if scenarios fans asked for, like, what if the other half of the universe got snapped away? But the writers continually prove that they don't understand their own concept. And as a bonus, we get more Captain Carter. Fantastic. Episode 1 is What If Hulk Fought the Mech Avengers? Weakest season opener yet. Hulk meets Sam on a jog and ends up in therapy. And like a dumbass, for some reason, Bruce decides blasting himself with more gamma rays will cure the Hulk. Obviously, it doesn't. Instead, it spawns a kaiju, and we suddenly have a bad Godzilla ripoff movie, mixed with Pacific Rim. Somehow Sam, Monica, and some random guy in a mech suit can fight these monsters, while the actual Avengers are killed off screen. That makes sense, right? But wait, it gets dumber. See, after a time skip, Bruce just so happens to have schematics for a stronger mech suit he never bothered to share until now. Then they use them to make a Voltron-style, Power Ranger-ass Megazord thing, and Bruce nukes himself into a kaiju to win. Why didn't Gamma Rays do this to him the first time? I have no idea. This episode is just pure nonsense and deserving of a 3 out of 10. Episode 2 is What If Agatha Visited Hollywood? But it's possibly the most boring episode of the season. Agatha, somehow, learns about the Celestial inside of the Earth and decides to perform a ritual to drain it of its power. By making a movie. Yes, that's a real sentence I just said. However, Stark funds the movie for reasons, and Kingo tags along. Somehow off-screen, Agatha overpowered the entirety of the Eternals lineup, and eventually used their power to absorb Tiamat's power. And then she fights and defeats Arishem before taking his power, making her possibly the most stupidly overpowered character in the MCU. But then, Kingo convinces her not to conquer the universe because she's a good actress, I guess. Good job, guys. Now, visually, it's solid. Writing-wise, not so much. 1 out of 10 episode. Episode 3 is, what if Red Guardian stopped the Winter Soldier? So instead of going undercover, Red Guardian decides to fight Winter Soldier because of jealousy, I guess. From there, Bucky, who is supposed to be brainwashed and emotionless, acts like post-therapy Bucky from the main timeline, full of quips and snark. Why? I have no idea. They decide to then go on a buddy cop road trip, get into dumbass scenarios, and the episode ends mid-battle with no real conclusion. It also somehow has Iron Man in the Avengers lineup, despite having completely changed his backstory by not killing Tony's parents, but instead killing Obadiah Stane. This whole episode doesn't make any sense, which is crazy to me because the Winter Soldier was done well just a season prior, but somehow this season decides it doesn't want to do any of that. Episode 4 is, what if Howard the Duck got hitched? Oh boy, I didn't think it could get worse. I was wrong. For whatever reason, they chose to continue Party Thor's universe and focus on Darcy and Howard the Duck getting married and having a child. No, I am not joking. That is the actual synopsis of this episode. However, Darcy lays an egg and somehow the galaxy wants it, including S.H.I.E.L.D., Dormammu cultists, Thanos, Zeus, and the Frost Giants. Why? Because it's apparently born 9 months before the Convergence, the events from Thor the Dark World, and might be all-powerful. Why it affects only this baby and none of the hundreds of trillions of beings that are born across the entirety of the universe at the same time? I have no idea. It ends with the egg hatching and the duo name her Birdie. Right. The episode is peak nonsense. It's not funny, the characterizations are all sorts of wrong, and the plot is completely fucking insane. Fury eventually says, it's too powerful, let me leave it alone, despite that being the entire reason S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted it to begin with. And everyone just goes home. This might be the worst, most nonsensical episode of any sort of TV show Marvel has produced. Ever. It is not just a 0 out of 10, this is a negative 10 out of 10. You will lose brain cells watching this episode. Episode 5 is, what if the Emergence destroyed the Earth? Finally, an actual fucking what if scenario. Well, sort of. In this timeline, Tiamat actually emerged from the Earth. Why? I have no clue. Riri Williams is our lead, because Marvel wants her to matter, I guess. And she fights the White Vision before being saved. We're also shown the world is so fucked up, but the world looks almost too fucked up, that it should be almost uninhabitable. But people are somehow alive. Hell, the Emergence itself should have killed everyone. White Vision, now working for Mysterio with no explanation, hunts the Resistance led by Valkyrie, Wong, and Okoye. I'm not exactly sure why the Emergence started sooner than it was meant to in the main timeline, and the show doesn't bother explaining why. But we're also not even sure when exactly this is supposed to take place either. The plot mostly revolves around exposition dumps, plot contrivances, and Riri being the only person capable of saving the day. Quentin Beck reveals that he's fused with nanites in order to stay alive, and tries to upload himself into Riri. She wins obviously, because Uatu gives her a pep talk. No, I am not kidding. And Beck is eventually killed. The villain was decent, but the rest, not so much. The story was a what-if scenario, but only barely, and it wasn't even a good one. 5 out of 10 episode. Episode 6 is What If 1872. Why are we in this timeline? Who knows? Shang-Chi and Kate Bishop randomly exist in the Wild West universe. There's no explanation for this timeline deviation. They just threw characters in and called it a day. The plot revolves around finding Shang's sister, who is now known as the Hood, and it's fine, I guess. There's a ghost train, random magic, and a half-baked Civil War subplot, and Uatu intervenes for no clear reason. It's a cool Western story, but because it isn't a what-if scenario, it is docked points because it is not following its own internal logic. 3 out of 10 episode. The episode ends with the Watchers fighting Uatu and sending shards of the 5th dimension into the multiverse. Episode 7 is What If the Watcher Disappeared? Just when I thought they couldn't milk Captain Marvel anymore, they promote her to team leader of a Multiverse Avengers knockoff. Carter, Kahori, a now grown-up Birdie, because why not, and a random Storm variant infused with the powers of Mjolnir join forces. Why are they a team? No idea. But at least we have Captain Carter, a basic super soldier, leading a team of literal cosmic beings. Now sure, Steve technically was doing the same thing, but the beings Carter is fighting are leagues more powerful than anything the Avengers had to deal with. And it is shown explicitly that Steve is at a disadvantage without Mjolnir here. But here, she is explicitly shown to be taking out multiversal beings no problem. So what's the mission here? Use the shards from the last episode that, by sheer plot contrivance, lands right in front of them in order to find Uatu within the 5th dimension. After multiple failed plans, Carter decides their best bet is to recruit a variant of Infinity Ultron who hasn't realized the multiverse exists yet. I do like this version of Ultron, who, after having destroyed all life in the universe, realizes that this isn't peaceful, it's just silence. However, the issue is, if this is the case, why not use all the Infinity Stones you currently have on hand and revive the universe? Either way, Captain Carter gets stolen away, and Ultron agrees to help the others. It's a cool idea, but it's buried under garbage execution, giving us a 2 out of 10 episode. But we're still not done, so hold on to your butts. Episode 8 is What If? What If? So the Watchers are mad at Uatu for meddling again, and decides to erase his mistakes, which for some reason they think is Captain Carter. Yes, somehow Captain Carter is seen as a bigger threat to the multiverse than Infinity Ultron. Before they can kill her though, Ultron saves the day, and then they all plan to stop the Watchers. Then comes the most poorly choreographed, worst logic fight in the entire show's history. The Watchers, who could have ended the battle instantly by just killing these people, decide to cast a spell that would erase every single version of these 3 characters across the multiverse, but the spell takes forever, giving people enough time to get through it. And in true Mary Sue fashion, Carter overcomes literal cosmic entities through sheer force of will, leading to the Watchers' defeat. The series ends with Uatu promising not to kill them because he has morals, I guess, to try and teach them why he does what he does. On the bright side, Carter may finally actually be dead. We'll never know, but we can only hope. 2 out of 10 episode. Overall, this season was the most disappointing season of What If, as it took every problem I had with the first 2 seasons, didn't fix any of them, dialed them up to 11, and proceeded to remove any good thing that the first 2 seasons had going for it. It never gave us interesting characters. It had some of the worst inconsistencies I've ever seen. It barely followed its own concept, and sometimes didn't even tell us what change was made to have the episode happen. And worst of all, it sacrificed good storytelling for spectacle and gimmicky stories. The sad part of how this show ended is, I don't think we're getting another season. And for an anthology series trying to show us the vast possibilities of the multiverse, each season ended with some multiversal crossover event that made each time we saw them less special. And for some reason, 1/3 of the entire series was dedicated to the same variant of Captain Carter. But with so many scenarios, I want to ask you, the viewers, what universes would you have rather seen in the show? Overall, a very poor 1.5 out of 10 season. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't looking forward to Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man after seeing its production timeline. At first, I was excited since it was originally pitched as an animated origin story for Tom Holland's Peter Parker. There's still so much about his version of Spider-Man we don't know about yet. How he got bitten, where the spider came from, what happened to Uncle Ben, but then they pivoted, tying it into the Multiverse Saga and turning it into an alternate timeline story. Honestly, it felt like it started off as a What If episode before they expanded it into its own full season. Then I saw the trailers. The animation looked stiff, the fights seemed flat, especially coming off of X-Men 97, and even What If's better visuals. It was disappointing to see, but you know what? Marvel surprised me. One of the biggest criticisms of Tom Holland's Spider-Man is how much he's leaned on the other MCU characters like Iron Man, Nick Fury, and Doctor Strange to push his story forward. But this show, once Strange was removed early on, smartly hard pivoted into telling its own story, focusing on Spider-Man's world. That hooked me. I genuinely looked forward to each new episode weekly. My friend even had to convince me to start watching after episode 3 dropped, and I'm glad he did. The show isn't perfect, but it's solid enough that I'm actually excited for season 2. The basic premise is we follow Peter Parker months before his powers are supposed to manifest in the main timeline. He's at orientation for Midtown High when a dimensional monster attacks, followed by Doctor Strange. In the chaos, a spider from what seems like another universe crawls through the portal and bites Peter much earlier than it was supposed to in the main timeline. Because of this, Peter never attends Midtown, instead landing at a public school, making new friends, and saving this universe's Harry Osborn, setting his life on a completely different trajectory. Now here's where it gets interesting. Instead of Tony Stark mentoring Peter Parker during the Civil War, Norman Osborn steps in, seeking to find out who Spider-Man is after Peter saved Harry. Norman offers Peter an Oscorp internship and supplies his suits, essentially filling Tony's role, but with very different intentions. What's smart about this is, it shows that whether Tony or Norman mentors Peter, it still stunts his growth as a hero, just in different ways. Tony genuinely cared about Peter, but Norman? He wants to control Peter, but the show almost convinced me that this version of Norman was a good person who might avoid becoming the Green Goblin. Until the moment he drops the line, "With great power comes great respect." Right then, you know he's manipulating Peter for his own goals. From there, Peter wrestles with Norman's growing influence, caught in a web of Oscorp's corruption and Doc Ock's schemes to steal their tech. I also liked some of the new characters. Nico, Lonnie Lincoln, and Harry were great additions. Now, I'm usually never a fan of race-swapping classic characters. When I saw Norman and Harry were race-swapped, I was hesitant. But here, it felt more tasteful. It wasn't done for political messaging, and I think that can be done well, depending on the context. The characters were well written and voiced, so I got over it pretty quickly. I still would have preferred the comic-accurate versions, but it's still fine this way, especially with the performance of Coleman Domingo as Norman Osborn. Also, yes, Daredevil shows up, voiced by Charlie Cox, and it's an amazing cameo. One of my favorite characters ended up being Lonnie Lincoln of all people. He's introduced as a potential bully, but he turns out to be a genuinely nice, smart, and kind kid. Watching him slowly spiral into becoming Tombstone was both sad and engaging. It's a strong arc, and I'm curious where they'll take it. Now here's my big lingering question though. Why does Oscorp exist in this universe? The finale reveals that Peter's entire story is a bootstrap paradox. After Strange tries to stop Norman's portal experiments, the Oscorp spider falls into the portal and ends up biting Peter, thus starting the events of episode 1. So something must have changed that led to Oscorp's existence, but we're never told exactly what that is yet. But hopefully season 2 answers that question. In the end, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man turned out to be a solid, self-contained story. It's not the Tom Holland origin story that I wanted, but it's a good Spider-Man story in its own right. Some animation stiffness, a few plot contrivances, and characters I didn't care for much, but that aside, I genuinely enjoyed it. It's an 8 out of 10 show in my eyes. Daredevil Born Again was a show that both made me excited and scared the hell out of me at the same time. So when the show was first announced, I was excited to see how the show would go, since Daredevil is my favorite comic book character ever since the first show was released on Netflix. I started reading comics because of this show. I loved the first 3 seasons, and was hoping desperately that this would be Daredevil Season 4. Then I saw it was going to be 18 episodes, and I got even more excited. But then I saw the troubling production it was going through, and I got scared. Because then I heard the show was going to be PG-13, that Karen and Foggy weren't going to be even in the show, and it would be more of a legal show, and we all know how the last Disney legal show turned out. And then they said he wasn't even going to suit up until episode 4. It was a mess, and of course it was. They hired CW writers. Do you not know the memes, guys? There's a reason that they call a show that looks bad a CW level show. But then I could breathe a little more when I heard that they fired all the old writers, and they essentially were going to make Daredevil Season 4, and bring back the stunt choreographers from the Netflix shows, and Dario Scardapane, who wrote for Loki Season 2, and the old Punisher show came in to write for this show. They brought back Karen and Foggy, then I saw the leaked set photos, and I was scared again. I felt like someone was going to die, and I was right. Almost immediately, they kill off Foggy. So let me back up for a moment and explain why they went down the route that they did. Because they had already filmed 4 episodes of the original show, and then Kevin Feige was like, "This show is terrible, do it again," they for some reason decided to keep the old footage and film everything else from scratch, and then stitch it all together in the editing. So then they went through months of reshoots and came back with what we saw in season 1. Now, this has sparked controversy with fans who say that the show is amazing, and other people who are saying the show is absolutely terrible. And I guarantee you some of the fans clicked this video just to see my take on it. And I gotta say, I'm somewhere in the middle. Now, I do appreciate that the show tried to course correct, but I think the show needed a complete overhaul. Not that the show is terrible, it's still leagues above most other shows from this saga, but it stops itself from being truly masterful. But I'm also willing to give this season a mulligan because the show writers weren't allowed to scrap the old footage. If they were, I'm sure they would have made a truly great season, and I'm still way more hopeful for season 2 to be much better. Basically, the show opens with Matt, Karen, and Foggy celebrating their latest court case win, but Foggy ends up getting shot and killed, quote unquote. I use that phrase loosely because I personally don't think he's dead, but I'll get into that later. Because of this, Karen leaves and their firm breaks up, and then Matt ends up joining another law firm. The show then spirals into a series of events that lead into a few different storylines. One is that Matt ends up in a relationship with a whole new character named Heather Glenn, who, I'm gonna be honest, I really didn't like her. Same goes for most of the new supporting cast. It's like the old show writers wanted to replace Foggy and Karen, but you just can't do that. They're too integral to Matt's story. But despite the show being a weird Frankenstein's monster of a show, stitching the old footage with the newer footage, it still managed to be way better than most other shows from this saga. But that of course still comes with its hangups. Like I said earlier, some of the new cast doesn't land for me, but the ones that do are characters like Daniel and BB, oddly enough. I actually thought she would be my least favorite character, but she's actually pretty cool. And for as much as I think they put too many storylines in the show, I still liked each storyline, even if it felt even more saturated than Daredevil Season 2 did. Which has been criticized for the exact same reason, trying to tell the Punisher story and then following it up with the Elektra and the Hand story. My personal least favorite story from Daredevil. Difference here is, I liked all three storylines. They just suffer from a lack of breathing room. The trial of the White Tiger is fun, and had the most breathing room of the entire season. Then, the Muse storyline felt like it started and ended way too quickly. Personally, I would have cut out the bank heist episode completely, as that episode was the least connected of all the episodes, and should have been cut to make room for more Muse stories. But even with this episode being the worst episode, even according to Charlie Cox himself, however, it's still an enjoyable episode. Now, if I can make a personal suggestion to help retcon the Muse storyline slightly, make it to where he either gained powers through his death and returns, or make it a cult of muses, or even make it a copycat Muse who has his comic book powers. Because Muse is too cool of a villain to be a one and done, if you're going to commit to him for a full season or use his powers. Just a suggestion, I think it would be really cool to use him again. Then of course the Bullseye and Foggy stuff was barely mentioned in episode 1, only to come full circle around in the final 2 episodes. But the show actually felt like a show. The characters of Matt and Fisk actually felt like themselves again. Frank is always fun to see, and Bernthal is the best live-action Punisher to date. Now finally, I want to talk about Foggy. There's still a lot of theories to say that Foggy is still alive and faked his death, and I personally believe these rumors. 1, it's something he's done on many occasions in the comics. And 2, a lot of stuff that happened in the show reflects things that happened in the comics that led to Foggy faking his death. Yes, including Matt hearing Foggy's heart stop, and one of the comics actually had Vanessa fake Foggy's death, which is even more suspicious given how she was the one responsible for hiring Bullseye to begin with. And 3, why would Bullseye of all people shoot someone in the chest when the head would have been the most logical spot for someone like him? My thoughts is, he was told to shoot Foggy in a spot where he would most likely survive. And Foggy is either revived later and put into witness protection, or something was in the bullet that helped his heart mimic death, though admittedly that last one is just me spitballing and sounds the most comic booky and most outrageous. I think the reason they even did this for Foggy and Karen is because they had so much footage where Karen and Foggy weren't present and they weren't allowed to just throw it all away, so they needed a way to get them temporarily out of the picture just long enough to bring them back sometime later, while simultaneously making sense to the story and matching the context of the comics. That's just me making an educated wish though. So yeah, I liked the season overall. I liked how it ended. However, I think Kingpin as mayor is a little far-fetched, admittedly, and some of the characters weren't really hitting for me. But here's hoping season 2 replaces characters we don't like as much, and bring back the characters we do. And then we'll be back on track. I'm also excited to see the Punisher special that they got cooking up, and that they teased at the end of this season. I liked the Punisher story here. It matches how he acts in the comics. Some people seem to think that he hates all cops, but it's just clear that people truly don't get the Punisher. I do have a video idea that I'm cooking up that will be dedicated solely about the Punisher, so look forward to that in the future. But I'm just glad that Marvel isn't shying away from using him, and I'm glad that Jon Bernthal himself gets the character and writes for his own shows and is working with Dario on the special to make it true to the character. So overall, though not even close to perfect, it's still a great show. I still enjoyed watching it, even if it's not as good as the original Netflix show yet. I have faith that Dario and his crew can one-up themselves and make Season 2 even better. Overall, I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. Oh boy. This fucking movie was a mess even before it got released. And it only got worse after release. Originally titled New World Order with a different plot entirely, the movie underwent extensive reshoots and disastrous test screenings. Fearing another box office flop, Marvel tried to salvage it by renaming it Brave New World, a title that makes no sense, and ironically, New World Order would have fit better. Now, I don't think politics inherently ruins a movie. Like I said before, Falcon and the Winter Soldier handled Isaiah Bradley's arc well because it fit the narrative. But this movie, afraid of offending anyone, stripped out politics entirely. And that's a problem for a Captain America movie, especially when dealing with an election and a global conflict. These films always had a political edge to it. The Winter Soldier questioned government surveillance, Civil War debated freedom versus security. Brave New World had nothing. It played everything as safe as possible. And then there's Sabra. Let's get this out of the way right now. Sabra, or Ruth Bat Seraph, is a controversial character from the comics, largely because of her Israeli roots. Originally, she and Arabian Night were used to comment on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with Sabra realizing her side wasn't innocent either and seeking redemption. Later, Marvel retconned her as a mutant who left the Mossad and shedding her national icon status entirely. But casual comic tourists, unaware of her arc, latched onto her debut issue to claim she's a symbol of genocide, fueling backlash against her inclusion here. Personally, I like Sabra's redemption arc in the comics and her later runs, so I have no problem with her in this film. I just wish they handled her casting better. Nothing against Shira Haas, but she looks way too small to be a convincing former Black Widow. Scenes with her throwing around men twice her size looks ridiculous, especially since she doesn't get her comic mutant powers here, a baffling decision considering that adamantium is introduced in this movie, a metal from the X-Men comics. If they'd followed her retcon and kept her Jewish identity, but dropped the Mossad past, she could have worked. But as presented, she's just another stoic, unlikable female lead. And unfortunately, people now equate her with modern geopolitical issues instead of her actual story. But she's still a character I'd be happy to see return. Swiftly moving on, the cast wasn't bad overall. I liked Isaiah Bradley here more than in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He's presented as a disillusioned veteran wanting Sam to be a symbol of the people, echoing Steve Rogers' legacy. Harrison Ford does a decent job as President Ross, though I still wish they had casted Sam Elliott in the role. But despite that, I appreciated the slight character growth for Ross. He's no longer blindly anti-superhero, and I do like how Ford portrays him here. Sam is more likable here than in his own show, acting less self-righteous and more like a genuine leader. But that's where the positives stop. Plot-wise, Ross, now president, tries to broker peace over the newly discovered adamantium found within the Celestial Island. Yes, the same Celestial from the Eternals. They're finally addressing that plot point. He invites Sam to reform the Avengers, but Sam hesitates. Meanwhile, Isaiah Bradley gets brainwashed, along with 5 other veterans, and attempts to assassinate Ross, failing in the attempt. Sam investigates to clear Isaiah's name, but the movie undercuts its own mystery almost immediately by revealing the culprit, that being the leader. The leader, teased all the way back in The Incredible Hulk, finally returns. But instead of getting his classic look or even his newer look, they went with the broccoli top look. Weirdly enough, Invincible did this look better. Now, despite being marketed as a genius, he explains his entire evil plan to Sam almost immediately. What's his scheme? After helping Ross win the presidency, he didn't get his promised pardon, so now he plans to ruin Ross's career, but instead of just killing him or taking over himself, his convoluted master plan involves lacing Ross's heart medication with gamma radiation to transform him into the Red Hulk. Yes, all of this buildup leads to a 10-minute Red Hulk fight, spoiled in the trailers by the way, where Sam fights Ross one-on-one. And here's the problem. Sam, a normal human, somehow survives a punch from a Hulk using nothing but his vibranium shield. Sure, the shield can absorb energy, but Sam cannot, and would be dead. Plot armor at its finest. Then he wins by talking down Ross, a scene that was seemingly built for Betty Ross, instead of Sam. And that's really the issue. This film tries to make Sam a traditional superhero, when he was always better as a grounded, tech-based fighter. Falcon and the Winter Soldier centered around the idea that no one would accept him as Captain America, yet in this film, everyone seems perfectly fine with it, which raises the question, what was the point of that entire show? Honestly, I don't think Sam needed to be Captain America to be a good character. I liked Sam, and I think he could have led the Avengers as Falcon, but instead, the comics version of Sam as Cap is forced onto him. And like in the comics, it just doesn't work here. Maybe if they had given him a new name like Eagle or something, that could have sidestepped the baggage entirely and let him be his own character and not give him the hand-me-down achievements of another hero. Cause Sam really just didn't need it. He's good enough on his own. Now, Marvel's done good derivative characters before, a good example being Miles Morales and Miss Marvel, who work if they're well written. And they're distinct from their original counterparts for the most part. Sam deserved the same treatment. Worse still, this doesn't feel like a Captain America sequel. It barely feels like a continuation of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Instead, this feels like The Incredible Hulk 2, resolving plot threads from a 17-year-old movie with Sam dropped in as a placeholder lead. Because Sam lacks major villains from his own comics, the film cannibalizes Hulk's storylines, leaving Sam feeling like a guest star in his own movie. In the end, Captain America Brave New World is just another safe, forgettable MCU entry. It plays things so safe, it ends up being hollow. Sam deserved better than this. 5 out of 10 movie. Not as terrible as the Marvels, but nowhere near the same heights as Steve Rogers' Captain America trilogy. Thunderbolts was a surprise for me. By that I mean, I didn't hate the movie, and it's probably my 3rd favorite movie post-Endgame. Though that's not a hard hill to climb. No, what surprised me is how much I didn't hate it, though maybe it's just because my expectations of this film were so low, anything above complete horseshit would have surprised me. But this managed to actually be good. However, that doesn't mean it even cracks my top 10 for all MCU films, because this film is still riddled with problems. One of them being what seems to be the biggest praise this movie has gotten from fans, but I'll get into that in a second. I'll start with what I liked about this film. First off, the story was decent enough. Many say this was Marvel's Suicide Squad, and while the concept is similar, the story is not. In fact, it's actually the opposite, where Waller was forming the Suicide Squad in that movie. In this movie, Valentina is trying to not get impeached and is trying to cover up her using all of these agents by trying to have them all kill each other in a facility that has all of her evidence and then torch the whole thing. Unluckily for her, the group sniffs this out and narrowly manages to escape. Then they have to form a reluctant team to try and get revenge on her and later stop her from destroying New York using Bob. Again, a cool concept with good action, and I'm glad the use of CGI was at a minimum here and actually looked good. I like that they tried to actually make Yelena a good written character in this film. Yeah, that's probably one thing I'll say about Yelena that maybe nobody else agrees with me on or noticed at all. But Yelena, to me, was not a believable character, and it frustrated the hell out of me. Do you guys remember in Winter Soldier when Bucky got taken out of a brainwashed state, and it took multiple movies and mandated therapy to get over all the bad things that he did? Well, apparently for Yelena, she just needed some hot Cheeto dust to make her completely normal and allowing her to crack jokes like nothing ever happened to her. And this persisted through Black Widow and Hawkeye. So I appreciate that they finally decided to actually let her work through some sort of trauma for what she went through. But she still isn't the best character in this movie. No, that title is reserved for the GOAT himself, known as John Walker. Still the best character despite Marvel trying to gaslight you into trying to hate this character. Every time the people around him try and put him down, it retroactively makes him even better as a character. They even try and say in this movie that John killed an innocent man, but no. John killed somebody that actively participated in acts of terrorism to innocent civilians and assisted in the death of John's friend Lamar. He's not innocent in any way. I really never understood the hate for John Walker. Something I barely touched upon in my last video, but I'll try my best to do here. John Walker was supposed to be set up as a bad version of Steve Rogers, but the writers are so bad at their job, they accidentally made the best character of the MCU post-Endgame. Meaning, John Walker is a great character not because of anyone's good writing, but instead because of their bad writing. John said multiple times that he never wanted to be Steve Rogers, and even when speaking to Lamar, he thinks that his time in Afghanistan didn't feel right, despite his 3 Medals of Honor. But being Captain America was the first thing that felt like he was doing something good. Now, I really liked Sam Wilson's character all the way up till Endgame, but the writers of Brave New World and Falcon and the Winter Soldier made his character an awful person. Less so in Brave New World, but it's still kinda there. I could maybe see him as Cap if they absolutely wanted to go that route, but I don't think he needed it. Like I said before, I could easily see Sam leading the Avengers as Falcon. He doesn't need Steve's title to do that. But seeing how the writing is now, I know this might be a hot take, but I actually prefer John Walker as Cap over Sam Wilson. Not because of any race thing, but simply because of how awful the writing for Sam Wilson has been. That they somehow turned me off to the idea of him being Cap. Now, that's not me saying I wanted John Walker either, but I just liked it more. Honestly, I just prefer no one to be Cap at this point and just retire the mantle altogether. Like what they did with Iron Man. I've seen a lot of people online say that Steve was a good man trying to be a perfect soldier, but John was the perfect soldier trying to be a good man. And this perfectly describes the differences between them. Anyways, back on track, we also have David Harbour's portrayal as Red Guardian, one of the few good characters in current MCU, and someone who actually looks excited to be in this film. Bucky, who got his Winter Soldier aura back, and by the end of this movie seems to have helped the rest of the team redeem themselves. Then there's Bob, my second favorite character in this film, as this movie seems to be entirely focused around him. He's interesting and nuanced, and damn it, he's fun to watch in this movie. That's about all the praise I can give the movie though, so let's talk about the negatives. Right off the bat, this team is lackluster. Even back when they first announced it, I knew I was going to hate how little variety there is. I mean, this team had some great characters in it since its first concept in the comics. The team is not named after General Ross, by the way, though in later iterations they did give a nod to it by adding Ross as Red Hulk to the team. However, they had the perfect setup to make a more comic-accurate team after having teased an Abomination return and having Zemo on the loose, who, by the way, is the original team leader. But they instead decided on a Black Widow clone, an assassin, someone who can phase through shit, the most interesting of the group sadly, and 3 super soldiers. Worst of all, Taskmaster was in all the promo art and everything, only to bite the bullet, quite literally, within the first 17 minutes of the movie, with a total of, 4 minutes on screen. Then Yelena, the person who actually knew her, had no reaction to her death. Okay, sure. Not that most people are sad to see her gone, but if you're going to unceremoniously kill off a character, at least have some weight to it, like a sacrifice at the end or something. But at least this will leave room for Tony Masters, God willing they don't fuck up that character. Then there's the thing everyone praises for this movie, its message on mental health. I'm glad the movie tried to be a little edgier with this and tackle something that is a little bit out of their comfort zone, something the MCU really needs to do more of, but they did not tackle it very well. The first line is Yelena saying that there's something wrong with her, and throughout the whole film, it's everyone talking about how they have issues, and that they are depressed and lonely, but we're never shown that these people are sad or lonely. Then, by the end of the film, they all go through Voight's grief bubble, and we're only ever shown Yelena's backstory's grief, and her getting over it. But I really would like to have seen everybody else's too, which is a big disappointment for me. Then, when Bob has to face the Void, he ends up just beating the shit out of it, which is symbolism that is about as subtle as a kick to the balls, and it's all fixed by the end by just hugging Bob. Alright, sure. Not how I would have done that, but okay. Then they all have to go after Valentina, who did this to them in the first place, but she instead instates them as the new Avengers, which, I gotta be honest, I wasn't a big fan of this. It made no sense that they just go along with this, even if Yelena said that they own her now, which is just a crazy-ass line to have, but whatever. So overall, this film was okay, but I didn't find myself laughing at any of the jokes. Some of the emotional moments landed, but what carried this film was the very few good characters in it. But for real, it's not a bad movie. I'd even say it's pretty good, but I don't see myself rewatching it anytime soon. Especially with how not excited I am for the post-credit scene teasing the Fantastic Four. Though I did like the Fantastic Four movie, I don't understand why this film needed to have that teaser. But overall, I enjoyed the fights, some characters, and Bob being the Sentry and the Void was really fun. But overall, it's a solid 7 out of 10 movie. Well, just like Marvel, I've put this shit show off long enough. It's time for Ironheart. And oh boy, am I not excited about it. Listen, this show could have been good if they put the same modicum of effort that they put into Miles Morales into this character. But no, this show is probably the worst of this phase, and it feels like how the Phase 4 shows were. And for good reason. This show was announced way back during Phase 4, along with all the other unreleased projects like Armor Wars and Blade, but instead of putting effort into making those two projects, mind you, that people were actually way more excited for, they decided to continue work on this show. But they waited to drop this show because they knew it was going to be garbage until they literally ran out of excuses to delay it any longer and dropped it in 2 3-episode parts, just to get it out of the way. And if you're looking at this show, you can tell it was created during a time where they weren't trying to get back into the good graces of their fans again, because this show has the exact same feels of Phase 4 projects. First off, because they've had the show ready for a long time, it's back to the 6-episode formula that dragged prior shows. Secondly, this show is paced poorly because it, again, is following the idea of taking a movie plot and stretching it out into 6 parts, instead of just building it from the ground up as a TV show. But the biggest sin this show commits is just being boring and uninteresting. Riri Williams is a character that I found to be the most boring character of Wakanda Forever, so no one had any interest in this show. Her comics weren't that great either, but Miles Morales and Ms. Marvel have proven you can still make a likable character and or a great project with a character who was unpopular from the comics. However, this show doesn't do that. Now, you've probably heard all the rumors about this show, where Riri is an unlikable protagonist, and the show shits all over the legacy of Tony Stark, and, unfortunately, they're all true. Because let's be real, saying Tony can only be Iron Man because all he had was money is insane. Now, everybody else who's seen the show has pointed out the obvious, and that is, how can they forget the plot of their very first Iron Man movie?
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave! With a box of scraps!
However, that's just scratching the surface of Tony Stark's legacy. I mean, just off the top of my head, there's that time Tony bought stuff from a hardware store from a child's allowance to break into the Mandarin's lair. After, mind you, being stranded with no working suit and no money. There is plenty of times where Tony proves that to be a true hero, it takes heart. Tony even tells Peter that if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. I mean, that was the point of his Mark I armor in the first movie, to show that Tony is more than his money. But later on, Tony becomes a better person not because of his money, but because of his heart. But this show actively tries to shit on that legacy. Now the show writers try and gaslight us and convince us that that's not what they're trying to do. But throughout the entire series, they're trying to show you Riri is smarter than Tony, not by any good writing, but instead they do it with plot contrivances. When Riri scans her brain to make an AI, she falls asleep and whoopsie, she accidentally makes a more advanced AI than even Jarvis. What? Now, throughout the first half of the show, which showcases front and center the biggest fundamental issue with the show, it's terrible messaging. and that is, it's okay to be a terrible person as long as it's society's fault that you did it, or that you could have been worse, but chose not to. Then, by the third episode, Riri is shown to be one of the most entitled people I've ever seen in a show. She's self-centered, obsessed with being the title of the greatest, despite the fact that Tony is beloved not because he's a hero, but because he's a good person. She's being paid to help others cheat in school, which resulted in her expulsion, which she doesn't take accountability for at all. And then she joins a gang to commit crimes. And she's still trying to convince us that she's the good guy. Now, defenders of the show during its first half says that Riri is just going on her hero's journey phase, where she's going to be a better person by the end of the series. But after the final 3 episodes dropped, we were shown the complete opposite. By the end of the series, she's literally making a deal with Mephisto, making her even worse than she was when she started. So now the defenders are like, well, this is just her hero's downfall arc, just like Scarlet Witch. Now, a couple of things wrong with this setup. One, there was no build-up for this, or any sort of slow burn. It was just her being an awful person to her being evil. Now, usually when we see a hero's downfall, it's from a place of empathy on our end. Something happens to the hero that we can agree is awful, but we're hoping that they can get back to where they were before it's too late. If you want a perfect example of this, look no further than Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. The Jedi Council is constantly doubting Anakin, but they are not helping him and in fact making it worse. However, we don't really see that sort of thing from Riri here. She's just a horrible person, and somehow they try and convince us that she's a good person, and then she seemingly just becomes evil. But they don't really show us a reason to sympathize or empathize with her change. Hell, even Wanda's villain arc made more sense, even if the execution was bad. So where does that leave Ironheart? It's a series that fails at every level, from protagonist likability to respecting established MCU lore to basic story structure. It doesn't even set up a character arc, it just drags a flat, selfish character through 6 episodes of poor decisions, only to try and twist it into some kind of downfall arc with no build-up, no emotional weight, and no reason for the audience to care. You can't call it a hero's journey if there's no journey, and you can't call it a tragic hero fall if the audience never liked the character in the first place. Even worse, the show's attempt to constantly validate Riri's intelligence feels desperate. It's not earned through clever writing or satisfying payoff, it's forced through plot contrivances and gaslighting dialogue. Making better AI than Jarvis while asleep? That's not character development. That's bad fanfiction tier writing. And then there's this disrespect to Tony Stark. Whether intentional or not, this show spends most of its runtime trying to convince you that Tony Stark, arguably the heart of the MCU, doesn't deserve his legacy. It's not just bad storytelling, it's actively harmful to the franchise's foundation. Marvel had a chance to create a great successor character worth rooting for. Miles Morales and Kamala Khan, whatever your thoughts on them are, were at least somewhat handled with care, even if there was hiccups along the way. A little bit more hiccups towards Kamala, more so than Miles, arguably. They had real arcs, personal struggles, and genuine charm. Riri Williams? This show turned her into an arrogant, selfish, villainous protagonist with no heart, and worst of all, Marvel is proud of it. After all the delays and behind-the-scenes chaos, Ironheart finally released, and proved once and for all exactly why Marvel wanted to bury it. Final score, 1 out of 10. An unwatchable, arrogant, soulless failure of a show that does nothing for the MCU except spit on its past and sabotage its future. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't include X-Men 97. Simply put, it didn't really tie into the MCU as far as I could tell. If it does, cool, but I didn't see any real connection. That said, I did enjoy it. It's a solid 8 out of 10. It's essentially a sequel to the 90s cartoon that ended before I was even born. So I just watched a recap of the original to get up to speed. You can watch it without seeing the old series, but from what I've heard, the Easter eggs and callbacks hit harder if you've seen it. Maybe I'll check it out one day. It's only 76 episodes, and hey, I've seen longer anime, and it's all on Disney Plus if you're interested. But with that, that is every single MCU project from Phase 4 and 5 finally done. I feel like I've aged 10 years having to rewatch all that shit and compile it into one massive review. I decided to split into 2 videos, otherwise it'd be over 2 hours, but hopefully it was worth it, because I'll probably need therapy after this. Now, Fantastic Four did release recently, and Marvel Zombies just came out, so we'll see how that treats what I like to call Marvel's desperation phase. I mean, they got Robert Downey Jr., so you're halfway there, I guess. Speaking of, after having watched all this, and knowing what's coming, at least to some degree for Phase 6, I gotta say, I'm not excited for Doomsday or Secret Wars. The reason I say this is there is no build-up for this movie. A lot of the cast and characters we've barely gotten to know in this saga, and some of the cast are characters from completely different franchises, like the X-Men. I think their best way to fix this is to just delay Doomsday and Secret Wars until you get some sequels to the new characters you've already made, and don't make any projects for new characters. The reason Infinity War and Endgame did so well is because we had multiple movies and shows to get to know these characters. But here there's almost no one, and it looks like they're going to fall into the same cameo your way to the top trap that got them here in the first place. As for Fantastic Four First Steps, I managed to finally watch it, and I did enjoy it. But let me know if you actually want to see me review the movie, because I have some mixed views on it. And of course, people are saying Marvel is back with this film, but I'll say again, one good film isn't good enough to win back your fans. Marvel needs to prove it to us with back-to-back great movies before I can start trusting him again. So even though this movie is good, you've got to surprise me with at least 2 or 3 more great films before I can say Marvel is back. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my rankings? What's your favorite Phase 5 project? How would you rate each one? Leave me all your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you really like this video and you want to see more like it, why not hit the subscribe button for more if you guys enjoyed? And hit that notification bell for more videos like this. Also, check out all my socials in the description, join my Discord, and check out my Patreon if you guys want to support me further. And until next time, guys, stay hype, stay awesome, stay weird, and be nice to each other. I'm CyberTechWolf, and I'll see you guys next time.